Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or if you're here for the first time, hi, hello, thank you so much for checking me out. This is my March wrap-up video. So I had a really good month in March. I ended up reading a full 9 books, which I'm so happy with. That's the most I've read a month for actually quite a few months now. And overall I had a really good month. My favourite book was The Book Thief, which I gave a 5-star. And my least favourite book was probably City of Ashes, but it wasn't my least favourite because I didn't like it. It just was lower than all of the rest. So overall I had a really good month. My lowest score was a 3.5 star, so really good in terms of rating for the month, all pretty high rated because that's over halfway of my rating scale, which by the way, if you don't know, is out of 5 stars. I read 5 physical books, 3 ebooks and 1 audiobook in March, and the genres that I ended up reading were fantasy, romance, historical fiction, dark romance, crime, and a murder mystery. So let me get into the books a little bit and tell you how I found them all. So first up, I read A Sweet Mess by J.C. Lee. This was the Book Boyfriends Are Better Book Club's March read, so that is why I ended up reading this one. I ended up giving this book a 4-star rating. This is a contemporary romance which features baking and cooking. So tip number 1, do not read this book unless you have snacks because you will be hungry. The food and the cakes that are described in this book just sound out of this world, and I want to try every single thing that was in this book. It is a Asian rep book. The author is Asian, as are most of, if not all of the characters, and I thought that was really great. It's a super sweet book. Originally I actually thought it was going to be a lower rating book for me because I would say for about the first third, both the main characters were pissing me off. I was really bothered by both of their actions, and then in the second third of the book I started really warming up to the male main character, and I really was not vibing with the female main character at all, which is strange for me. And then I think it's about chapter 17, I think, so the last third of the book, they finally come together. Obviously this is a romance, it follows the typical romance setup of will they, won't they, and one of the things I didn't like about this book was that there was a lot of sort of won't they, as in it built it up so much, will they, won't they, and then nothing happened, it just fizzled out, and it did it one too many times to be enjoyable. It was kind of just getting a bit annoying towards the end for me. And then like I said, towards chapter I think 17, they finally get together and it's explosive and it's full of chemistry and it's really lovely as well. The last third of the book really did make up for first third. Overall I still think I prefer the male character. The female character still maybe bugged me a little bit. The thing that the female character did that was bugging me, just in case anyone was wondering, is that I felt she was very hypocritical. There was one instance, for example, where her inner monologue was saying that the boy was being really mixed signals with her, and honestly I didn't find that was the case at all. I thought he was being quite clear in his intentions, and actually the person that was giving a lot of mixed signals was herself. And there was just a few instances of things like that I wasn't such a fan of, but like I said, I was emotional. I ended up staying up quite late to finish it, and so overall I gave it a 4 star. The next book that I read was Pucked Up by Helena Hunting. This is a sports, ice hockey, sexy romance. It featured 2 characters that had learning difficulties, which I think was a really good rep to see in a romance, and maybe because of this, or maybe it's just the character the author decided to write, but the male character was actually quite vulnerable in this book when he finally let people in and see that, okay, he does have this learning difficulty and things can sometimes be harder for him. He really came out at the end of it a lot more open and a lot more vulnerable, and I loved seeing that. I love a vulnerable male lead in a romance because often it's the female we see being vulnerable, and I love that power play. So that was really good. This is a companion novel series that I'm reading. This is the second book. I absolutely adored the first book, Puck, so I've wanted to read the whole series. And this one for me, I will admit, was rated lower. Pucked for me was a 5-star read and was my favourite read in February. However, I think I ended up giving this one 3.75 stars. It wasn't a bad book, it's just personally for me, it didn't hold the same spark at all. But I think I knew it was always going to do that because I loved the first book so much, and this is a different couple. However, it does have some really good scenes. There is obviously some sex scenes in it, so this is a, I'd say, new adult book, and I would probably give it a UK movie rating of 15 rather than 18. There is less steamy scenes in this than the first book. It does have a bit more of an innocence vibe to it, and that's also because the characters themselves are a little bit more innocent, and actually that was really sweet to see as well. The problems that the relationship faced, I felt, was by the end a little bit repetitive because it was the same problem over and over and over again, and I felt like the couple was having the same argument and the same makeup scene every time. So for me, that's kind of why it had a lower rating and why I didn't enjoy it as much as the first book. However, like I said, still really good, and I'm going to continue on with the series in April by reading Pucked Over. Next up, I again read on my Kindle, and I read Deep Woods by Helena Newbery. Helena Newbery is an automatic buy author for me. I discovered her books probably, I think, within the last 5 years, and I discovered her books through a mafia romance series. She writes adult romance, sort of steamy romance books, and this one was really, really good. I ended up giving this a 4-star rating. However, I will say there's a little tidbit at the end which introduces a new series that she's doing, and I know this series is going to be up there for me because it introduces some characters I've previously read from her, which I adore, which is her Irish Brothers series, and they're going to be in a series with the main character of this book later on, so I'm really, really looking forward to that, and I think those books will be 5 stars to me, but I'm glad I had this one to set it up as well. So it was really, really good. It just, compared to some of her other books, all of her books for me have either been a 5-star, a 4-star, or I think a 3.5 is the lowest I've ever rated one of her books. And for me, this wasn't quite the same for me as her 5-star reads. To describe this plot, I will have to talk about content that may be triggering for some people. So just to let you know, this is a trigger warning alert. I'm not going to be speaking about any of these subjects in explicit detail, but I am just going to mention the fact that they're in the book. So this book features Bethany and Cal, and also a German Shepherd called Rufus, and really he is the star of this story and also one of the reasons I picked this book up, because there's a German Shepherd on the cover. Bethany is working a dead-end job. She appears to have had a bit of something happen in her past. You don't find out until later though what that is, and basically her job offers her a promotion, but she has to move to a new city. So she gets into the nice company car that is provided for her and drives off. Basically, it turns out that the company is a front for collecting women to human traffic, and she has actually been bought by a Russian human trafficker who we have met in previous Helena Newbery books. However, I will say there is obviously other women involved in this book and the topic of human trafficking, but that really is the most explicit this book goes into. It doesn't describe the events in extreme detail whatsoever. It does just brush upon the topics and you are aware that they are happening. So she manages to escape this big mansion she has been brought to in the middle of nowhere. The only direction for her to run in is into the forest. So into the forest she goes, and the bodyguards are chasing her. However, Rufus, the dog, basically scents her, runs off from his owner Cal, and basically jumps between Bethany and the men, and then Cal comes bombarding through the forest. Now Cal is this gigantic, muscly recluse who lives in the forest, like the forest is his world, with a shotgun. So these men take one look at him and they're like, nah, hiding. So basically he rescues her and he looks after her, and they live in the woods, and she explains everything that happened to him, and they're about to phone the police when they go to a town. However, as she's doing that, she sees on the TV that one of the men that were in that mansion with her is a general attorney for one of the states or something. So she realizes, uh-oh, this secret men's club is filled of really powerful men, and she's like, well, I can't tell the police because the general attorney is in this group. So basically it's about that. It's about her surviving in the woods with Cal, and a romance blossoms. Cal has his own dark secrets from his past, but he manages to use that to protect her in the end, and they end up being able to build a life together and kind of moving on from their past circumstances. Like I said, it does touch upon some dark subjects. However, all of the trigger warnings are listed in my Goodreads review, so please check that out if you are interested in reading this book. And whilst it is of a slightly darker nature, it still has a very light-hearted feel to it, and it's still just a really enjoyable romance. And like I said, I really enjoyed it. I think the only reason it wasn't a 5-star for me was just because comparing it to the other books of Helena Newberry's that I've read that were 5 stars for me, it didn't quite hit me maybe in the emotions. Also, I loved it, but I don't think I'm ever going to reread it. So that was why for me it wasn't a 5-star, because a lot of her other books I've reread like 10 times. And then I read this book. I read The Book Thief. This was, as I said, 5-star read for me. It was my favourite book I've read this month, and it's probably going to be a contender for the favourite book I read all year. This is an absolutely beautiful story that I have a hard time summing up without giving away spoilers, but essentially this is about the book thief, which is a little girl in Nazi Germany just before World War II breaks out and then throughout World War II. And so it is so cleverly written, because this book is technically narrated by death. And even though it's narrated by death, it's also kind of narrated from Liesel, who is the girl, perspective, because essentially this story he's telling you is her story. It's brilliant. The way the author has written this book is so clever, and it is a moving story. I do not cry easily at books. I think I can count on one hand the amount of books I've cried at, and this book made me cry. I wasn't sobbing my heart, but it is moving. It has moments of absolute pure joy and bliss and childhood sweetness and an innocence that only a child can bring, but also it's World War II Germany, so it has really hard moments as well, and you obviously see the treatment of Jews in this book, and it is hard, but the fact that it's told from a kid's perspective who doesn't really understand why her entire country is telling her to hate these people is just beautiful. And it is a book that I will, I think, for the rest of my life probably recommend that people read. So that's kind of all I'm going to say on it, but just read this book if you haven't, and if you have, please let me know in the comments, because I need more people to talk about this book with. The next book I read was Crescendo by Lana Skye. This is a dark reads, so as always, please check out my Goodreads review for a full list of trigger warnings for this book. They are definitely recommended. Read them before you read this book. I read this for my book group, and we are dipping our toe in the wide pond that is dark romances. So this was one we ended up reading this month. I ended up giving this book a 3.5 star. It's very hard to describe this book without giving spoilers. Although it's a dark romance, it is definitely not light. And the thing is, this isn't a romantic book, but also it didn't feel that dark, because there is a lot of topics that are brought up in this book that are extremely dark, but they're brought up. We don't see it in explicit detail, we don't read about it in explicit detail, but we are very aware of what is happening. The sex in this book, I would definitely say, is UK movie rating 18. That can be quite hard. Sometimes one of the good things about reading a dark romantic book is you have all of these really hard life issues usually, and you have some darker moments, but there's usually redemption at the end of the book, and I didn't feel like that with this book. There was no romance towards the end of this book, and I think it needed it. By the end of it, I felt like the characters hadn't fulfilled their growth arc. Now, there is a second book, but we were told before we went into this book by a friend of ours that you didn't need to read the second book. It didn't end on a cliffhanger or anything like that. And whilst it doesn't end on a technical cliffhanger, the book definitely did not feel complete to me. And I think I'm gonna have to read the second book to feel that completion. So I will be reading the second book, and I did enjoy this. However, it wasn't what I was expecting, so that was why I ended up rating it a bit lower. Next up, I read City of Ashes by Cassandra Clare. This is the second book in the Mortal Instruments Shadowhunter series, and I am reading one book a month with some of my friends from Miniathon, and especially Stasia from Readers C. This is the second book, and I ended up giving this a 3.75 star, which is a little bit more than I gave the first book, which I gave a 3.5 star. The reason I gave this book a little bit more was because I liked that the book is kind of filled with action straight from the start. You jump straight into the story, and it just keeps going throughout the whole book. It definitely is a quick and easy read because of that, and also the fact that this is a reread for me. However, the reason it was still a bit lower on the rating is mainly because I have realised I really don't like the main character of Clary, which is our main female character. I really don't like her. She is only 16 in this book, and I admit I do forget that because obviously in the movie and the TV show, she is clearly very much portrayed by someone who is not 16. Obviously she's dealing with this world of that she didn't know about, of vampires, demons, warlocks, etc. So fair enough. But she's a very self-centered character, and a lot of her actions are really selfish, and I just didn't vibe with her at all. So I really didn't like it. And when the book is told mostly in her perspective, that makes it quite hard to keep reading it and enjoying it when you don't like the mind that you're reading about. So that was kind of why it was lower for me. I did like some of the characters we got to see more of, and I'm excited to see the story keep going. Yeah, that's kind of all I have to say. Didn't vibe on Clary. Okay, so next I read Kathy Reich's Deja Dead. I am not going to talk to you about this book because I have a Deja Dead reading vlog, because this is my first ever Kathy Reich's Forensic Anthropology book. If you want to know why that's significant and why that's important, check out my Kathy Reich Deja Dead reading vlog. But overall, I gave this book a 4-star, and it's a good crime book, so go check my video out and also read this book. Next up, I finally finished the Raven Boys series, which I am buddy reading with my friend Leonie from Bookstagram, and so I read The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater, which is the 4th and final book in the Raven Boys series. Unfortunately, I really wanted to say that this would be a 5-star read for me because it finally concluded the series, but it wasn't. It was a 4-star, so I still really enjoyed it, but the ending was rushed. There is a lot that happens throughout the majority of the book, but when you compare it to what happens in literally the last 6 chapters, which is less than 100 pages, it is not that much that happens, and either the ending could have been built up a lot earlier and therefore been done with a lot more detail, or it could have been a longer book. Unfortunately, because of that, it was a little bit underwhelming, and that was a bit disappointing. I would still highly recommend this series to people, especially if, like me, you do not read a lot of fantasy and you're maybe looking for a series to get you into fantasy. This is a really good place to start. It's very light fantasy. I would describe it as magical realism or urban fantasy, which basically means that the magic and the fantasy is set in our world, so there's not a lot of world building, so it's a lot easier, I think, to wrap your head around than a high fantasy book if you're not used to that genre. So I really like that. I love the characters. I'm happy to say by the end of this book, which was one of my aims I was hoping for, there wasn't a character I disliked anymore, apart from obviously the character you're supposed to dislike. So that was nice. Overall, I needed more. The ending happened so quickly, and there's a lot of big things that happen that I had no time to process them, and I think because of that, I couldn't feel as invested and emotionally attached to the story as I wanted to be. Overall, 4-star, and I would highly recommend the series. Lastly, I ended the month with a super little book, and this is because it is the World Book Day Quick Reads from Holly Jackson, and this is Killjoy, a prequel to the current A Good Girl's Guide to Murder duology, which is soon to become a trilogy at the end of this year. And this kind of gives us the logic behind Pip, who is the main character, picking the investigative journalism project that is the main focus of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. So this features Pip going to a 1920s murder mystery party at her friend's house, and basically by the end of it, Pip is unsatisfied with how the murder mystery company decided to say who the murderer was, and because of that she is reminded of a murder that happened in her town 5 or 6 years previously, and she kind of realizes maybe that murder that happened in real life was wrapped up a little too neatly, and so she decides to do her project on it, and that's what A Good Girl's Guide to Murder is about. It's her investigating this murder that happened in her town. I really love this book. It was a 5-star for me. I honestly don't think there's anything Holly Jackson could do that wouldn't be a 5-star for me. As a classic Holly Jackson move, throughout the whole thing I was thinking, right, is it this person, is it this person, do I know who the murderer is, am I gonna guess it right? I was kind of right and kind of not, and I can't explain to you why without giving away the ending of the murder mystery party, but I was both right and wrong, and then right twice. If you read this book, come talk to me and that sentence will make much more sense. But it was a nice short book to end the month on to get me ready for my April reads. So that is everything. That was all 9 of the books I read. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and a comment. If you like my content, please subscribe to my channel for more videos. As always, I hope you have a lovely morning, day or night, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!